And we're going to start now. I can see that the recording has started. So I suppose let's open the floor. Let's start the event, Laura, if you don't mind. To have campuses in Singapore and Rabat. So some of our students might be joining us from these campuses. And this is part of the SIRENE series. The SIRENEs are seminars, online seminars, usually, not all of them are online, of the Institute of Research on Negotiation, which is part of ESSEC Business School, and on behalf of Professor Aurélien Colson, our director, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to talk about the situation in India, and particularly what is going to happen in the next term following elections which took place in April and May of this year in the world's largest democracy. As I always say to my students, this year has been quite special because 40% of the world population voted. In fact, France, which just voted, was not included originally in this in this account, but now we can add this to the crowd. Indeed, it's close to 1 billion Indians who voted. It is very impressive. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi was, of course, running for a third term with his party, the BJP, which in the end secured 240 seats, fewer than the 2019 results. I believe it was 303. But the NDA, which is the alliance that he had formed, won a total of 294 seats, which allowed the alliance to form a coalition, to form a majority, secure a majority. So for us today, really, the idea is to look at mostly the economic impact of these elections and to look at the status of India as a major economic powerhouse. And I'm delighted to have such a stellar panel from both India and Europe. And so I'm going to introduce all three of them. By the way, this event is being recorded, and we will have it posted on YouTube afterwards. So you are more than welcome to transfer the link later on once it appears on the YouTube channel of ESSEC. And also it will be posted on LinkedIn and the usual social media. And by the way, if you have questions, you're more than welcome to use the chat box during this conversation. You can just put your questions during the event, and we will leave some time for Q&A. So without further ado, and I'd like again our panelists to address really the economic aspects of this election and the post-election period and what the next Modi government will look like compared to Modi 2. And perhaps also it would be interesting to look at the social impact of these elections, or at least of the upcoming economic policy. as well as the international impact. And that one I will turn to Jean-Marc Fenet, my colleague from ESSEC, in the end for this particular aspect. So let me first introduce you the panelists, and I'm delighted to welcome from Delhi, Dr. Arpita Mukherjee, a professor at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, also known as ICRIER, a very well-known institution. Arpita has a long experience as a researcher, a professor, policy-oriented scholar, working closely with governments, and particularly in India, but I believe the national government as well as regional governments, but also the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, policymakers in the US, in the European Commission, and of course, a number of industry associations, NGOs, and corporations. So Arpita knows a lot about the Indian economy, particularly trade, investment, trade agreements, special economic zones, economic corridors. So I'm sure she'll talk about the ongoing India Middle East corridor, which everybody is wondering what's happening. And she will also talk to us, I believe, about e-commerce, which is a very, of course, important aspect of the Indian economy these days. And then, so after her, I will introduce, I'm now introducing Mr. Ranveer Singh Nayar, who is the managing editor of and various other publications, which are all related to India. Ranveer has spent his time between India and Europe, and he's been a journalist since 1998. He's been writing on international issues, from nuclear non-proliferation, Indo-French relations, Indo-EU relations, and also environmental issues and sustainable development. So welcome, Ranveer. And last but not least, Jean-Marc Fenet, who is a professor at ESSEC Business School and a senior fellow at IRENE. And Jean-Marc also spent many years in the government, and particularly as the Minister Counselor for Economic Affairs in three countries, in Poland, and more recently in India, and then China. So he has sort of big picture covering several continents, several countries, and also working for many, many years in the French Treasury. And we're very happy that he's in Paris now with us. And by the way, before we start the proper discussion, I also want to acknowledge the Indian Business Club, our friends based in Paris, who have been very instrumental in helping us putting this event together. We've already done several events on China-India relations, on the India budget, both online and offline, and today I believe is our third joint event, and a timely one. So thanks for being here with us. And let me start with Arpita, if I may, and perhaps you could give us the big picture of where India is standing as we speak, and especially with the Modi 3 government already starting in July. I believe Parliament will be in session soon. So does the election results translate into different policies from what were expected? Or is this more or less a continuation of the two previous terms of BJP and Prime Minister Modi, who, as I said at the beginning, was had full powers. Maybe he still has full powers, but he had to enter a coalition. So Arpita, thanks again for being with us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's a pleasure to be here. See, Modi 2.0 was not a very easy time, because many things happen in the world which I don't think any prime minister of any country could have predicted, from the COVID to the Russian war and everything. Amidst all of that, I think what was good was that the Indian economy was doing pretty well. It came out of the COVID very fast, and it has a high growth rate, and this high growth rate has been projected by IMF, World Bank, etc., to continue. So there has been a high growth projection for the economy. There are a couple of also good signs that has come up, like India's per capita income is rising in PPP terms. India kind of shot before went before the UK, and it is expected that India may become the fourth largest economy. So that's the kind of a feeling which is there. Now, after this year's election, you would see certain interesting things. The major ministries like finance, commerce, homes their ministers have not really changed. So there is not a major change or a rehashing of the economic policy that is thought through. The prime minister, after he came to office, the first thing he did was, almost one of the first thing was to release the PM Kisan Nidhi. So his the funding for the Kisans under the projects also as expected. So certain schemes and policies which were as if the business as usual continues. So this is another interesting thing, that he wants to show that business is as usual. There will be some lot of investment in the infrastructure, and it is expected that over the last in Modi 2.0 also, from I would say Modi first to the Modi second to Modi third, there has always been a continuity of investment in infrastructure, and they have already announced that these infrastructural investments are going to continue and there will be a lot of investment in the digital infrastructure, and DPI, digital public infrastructure, is one of the main things that the government would like to really take it forward. In terms of regulations, because when you talk about economics, you also look at regulations. A number of new regulations were formed, like the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, but the rules under this act will probably come down now. There were certain regulations which were actually good regulations, like the 4 occupational labor codes, which were put on hold for the elections. One may see some states were adopting them. They were aligned with the ILO decent work and other requirements. So they were, at the end of the day, helping India to probably sign a sustainable agreement chapter in the trade agreement. These were put on hold because there was a concern raised by certain trade unions and some other representatives about certain elements of the codes. But I think that the government will try to push them through, because the government will now try to enter into trade agreements. There are certain reforms that are not properly in place. For example, the SEZ regulation. The India was trying to come out with a Desh bill, and it did not succeed. So this is an gray area at this stage. I think these will be some of the low-hanging fruits that will need to look at. One other thing that comes out of this election result is that many a times, probably, and that's the thought among mostly a lot of expert in India, is that a number of nice schemes may have been there, but probably there may have been implementation gap, or there may be some people not so happy as they thought would have been so happy. So there may be a process of evaluations of schemes and programs, and kind of probably streamlining a few things. One of the way of streamlining will be probably probably they are trying to think about, and they are thinking aloud about creating some kind of a centralized export promotional body as well. So they are thinking about various ways in which things can be simplified, synchronized, get more data. Along with that, they are also thinking about, how they can move forward with the trade engagement. And this is where I want to specifically mention, because both India and UK were going in for their respective elections, and this agreement was in a very advanced stage. So this agreement is something that there is a lot of expectation that it will get closed, and Indian businesses are also looking forward to this agreement. European Union agreement is still, it will need time. It will need a lot of time, lot of unresolved issues. Probably the thought was that UK may be done much easier than the EU. That's the feeling that we get when we talk to businesses and others. So this is where the entire system is. But three things that the government now need to focus on. We are far behind our UN SDGs in many cases, and in the Indian G20 presidency also it has been brought to the notice that we need to focus on the UN SDGs, so health, social sector, and from just health to prevention of diseases to non-communication diseases. And the thought that the government is promoting is like this, from food security to nutrition security. So they're talking about more sustainability, even in matters like fruit supply chains, which are very much fragmented in India. So government is thinking about sustainability, climate change. Already Mr. Modi talked about life, his campaign about quality of life. And but as a developing country, there is also an expectation that there is need for funding, and hope that there will be a lot of funding in climate change incentives. So India would like to try to attract investments in technology, in startups, in climate change. So these are some of the ideas that are in place. However, as we speak, the country is getting itself ready for the budget. The budget announcement will give a little bit of clarity, because before election, the budget is a very simple, we don't want to rock the boat kind of a budget. Now you will get a budget which can be more innovative. Given that now in the first year of the election, it is also a good time to try out certain reforms. But the budget speech will enable us to understand what will be the priority. But definitely farmers are the priorities, MSMEs are the priorities, exports are the priorities, and signing trade agreements with clean export market also is a priority. So I stop here, and I can also come back and take some more questions.
Okay, I have one follow-up question for you, Arpita, if I may. A few weeks ago, I think there were reports about the north-south divide in India, and the fact that the country was becoming split, with a richer south and a poorer north, and that the gap was growing instead of narrowing. What do you think of that? Do you think this is a priority for the government?
Yes, there is a priority. This has been basically in any country which is trying to grow faster, there is a divide that you can see across the country, and India does have pockets of underdevelopment and poverty. The government also, in the previous regime, they had schemes like they were looking at aspirational districts. The government also came out with one district, one product, one district, one services. They were trying to go at the district level and try to bring up the district. But at the at the end of the day, because this is a quasi-federal structure, the states also compete among them to get investments, and some of the states are more proactive. But it's not a north-south divide. I must say that Gujarat was very proactive when Mr. Modi was there, and still is. Gujarat and Maharashtra gets a very high level of investment compared to, say, northeast of India. So there are variation across states, and the government tries to do many things to actually work across the states, like the ranking of the states in different ways and policies and ease of doing business. Then they are also trying to actually pump in more funding into the poorer state or the aspirational district. But definitely there is a divide, and there is not only a state-wise divide, there is also a growing divide between MSMEs and the large firms, with very few mid-sized firms in India. And that's again a problem that the government would like to solve.
Right. Okay, thank you. Let me turn to Ranveer. And Ranveer, you spend your time between India and Europe, as I understand. So you have a bit of an outsider's view as well as being originally from India. I'd be interested to have your overview on this the past few months and whether it brings new hopes for the Indian economy. I think in previous exchanges you mentioned the stock markets, which are a bit out of control, you said, beyond reason. So this is one sign. Obviously, we all know, even though ESSEC is a business school, we're not obsessed with the markets, but it's just one indicator as many. But I'd like to hear your thoughts also on the social impact of the BJP's economic policies of the past few years, whether it's helped the country. I mean, certainly the profile of India has risen dramatically, but whether economically it will help in a very competitive environment. And then obviously I will put the same question to Jean-Marc afterwards. But let's start with your reaction to the election results and how you see the next couple of years developing.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, I think one of the messages that came out quite loud and clear during the elections, I mean, during the campaign and definitely during the results, was that this perception of growing inequality in India is not just a perception. It's something which is there on the ground and people are feeling it. That is perhaps one of the biggest reasons why BJP lost almost half of the seats in the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is not only the largest state in the country, but also has been a stronghold of BJP for the past 20 years or so. So this loss was a major setback for them. And I think the message has reached the people that it should, that there is something to be done about inequality, because all the data has been pointing towards that. You know, if you look at just to give you some basics about it, the top 10% of India holds 77% of the wealth. India figures amongst the lowest ranking countries in Global Hunger Index. That means for a country which is the largest food producer in the world, and we produce all kinds of grains and fruits and vegetables and milk, we are unable to feed our population. We have the highest number of stunted children in the world. It's more than Africa. At some levels, if you combine all the African countries, our children are much more malnourished than all African countries put together. So these are the things that clearly are impacting Indians. But I talk about Indians, of course, I'm talking of the Indians who are not, in this middle class and the rising middle class, which is there. There's no doubt that there is a section of India which has done extremely well for the last 20 odd years. But there is a large part of India, a much larger part, which is falling behind. And I think this rising gap is what, the unhappiness of people with this rising gap came through very, very clearly in the elections. And I am certain that when the budget comes, there will be a significant reorientation towards of the policies to look at these gaps and how to plug them and plug them in a perceptible manner. So it's not just something which is there in terms of, speeches and slogans, but something which actually makes a difference, a true difference to the lives of common Indians. And why it's important, this budget, because soon after the budget, within 2 months, Maharashtra, which is a very, very large state, is about to go for its own local elections. Now, that state is currently ruled by BJP in alliance with some local parties. The ruling alliance in Maharashtra lost 2/3 of the seats in Maharashtra. It is certain that there will be certain, kind of policy orientation at Delhi to show to Maharashtrians that yes, India, the New Delhi government has received the message loud and clear, and they would like to address these issues because farmers are a very, very important part of Maharashtra. It's a very industrial state, but India remains a farming country. So farmers are important for every state of the country. And in Maharashtra, the farmers who have actually been supporting BJP, in places like Nashik, have actually turned against their party. So if BJP doesn't address these points very rapidly and very quickly and in a very visible manner, then they are bound to see more electoral setbacks. And this, I'm sure, is something that Narendra Modi is not prepared for. He's not prepared to handle these kind of losses. So that's one thing. The other orientation, as you spoke about the stock market. Yes, the Indian stock markets have been out of control, not just because the prices are rising, the stock prices are rising, but because of these options in futures trading. What has happened is that the retail investors who has literally no knowledge of the stock market and its intricacies is getting involved in it just by, egged down by some influencers on YouTube or Instagram. And even our Chief Justice of India was forced to raise this point last week, where he told the stock exchange regulator, SEBI, that let's do something about it. We need to be a bit more proactive in cautioning people that going to stock market, yes, it can bring you lots of riches, but it can bring you down very sharply and very quickly. And the government's own data indicates that last year, $5.5 billion was lost by retail investors on the Indian stock market. And that makes it about $1,500 per person, which is, for an average Indian, their annual salary. So the stock markets are out of control. And partly the markets are rising so fast because everybody is putting their money in it, but without thinking. So a large investor definitely knows what he or she's doing. But for retail investors, it's a maze and it's a gamble. And most of the times, like in a casino, the gamble doesn't work out for you. So these are the things that the government has to address. And I'm sure that there will be, even Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, she said that something needs to be done about it. So one hopes that they will get down to doing these things which are needed by India and by Indians. I would like to pause here and we can come back to other topics.
Thank you very much. Just wondering, you mentioned in the first part of your presentation that the Indian budget might have to take into account the election results, if I'm not mistaken. Could you elaborate a bit on that? How much does having a coalition leads the Prime Minister to adjust its policies with of course, a stronger, we're not going to comment too much on politics, but obviously the opposition is stronger than it was. It has more seats and it is somewhat revived. Are some of the policies that were in place being adjusted due to this slightly, I wouldn't say disappointing, but less unanimous results than expected?
Yes, I think the fact that they will be tweaking the policies of government will be driven by the allies that are supporting the BJP at the center. I see the demand coming from Chandrababu Naidu, whose party is the second largest component of NDA, and I see the demand coming from JDU in Bihar, whose party is also equally important. So between them, these two parties have about 33 seats, which is a very, very crucial element for Narendra Modi to hold on to power. So the demand that they make more provisions and very clear provisions for the poor. There are certain schemes in place, but the efficiency of those schemes needs to be seen. And they need to put in much more than what they have done so far. And I think this demand will come more from the coalition partners. And hence, if Narendra Modi wants to take these steps, he will not face resistance from them. And he'll definitely not face resistance from the opposition. So the path is very clear. Now it really depends on Modi himself whether he wants to go down that road and to what extent he wants to go down. Because in some ways, going down that road in a very big way, which I think is needed, but in some ways it will be a repudiation of what he has been doing for the last 10 years.
Right. Let us remind ourselves that this is an unprecedented third victory for a ruling party. At the same time, we all know there have been controversies about Prime Minister Modi, and in a way, the outcome needs to be translated somewhat, in the next 5 years. And it is. I mean, we are facing the same situation in this part of the world, in Europe. The electorate does have to be listened to. So it's mirroring a situation which is familiar to many members of the audience. And that leads me to Jean-Marc Fenet, who will actually give us a view from France, but also the view of someone who spent 4 years in New Delhi as a diplomat, but finally as an economist. So Jean-Marc, I'd like to hear your views on how you see macroeconomically the India we are talking about today, and also internationally, how is India perceived? Is it perceived as brilliantly as it would want to be compared to other economies? I'm thinking of China in particular. Or are things more complex than they may sound sometimes?
Thank you, Philippe. Actually, both topics are completely linked, actually, because the place of India will address this issue just in a few minutes, of course, on the world stage. But it depends also on the internal economic situation and the strength of India. Actually, India is now the fifth economy of the world. It intends to become the third one in a few years and to become a more developed country by the 2047 for the 100th anniversary of modern India, independent India. So it's very ambitious goals, actually. But as you said, this election, the result of this election have been tighter than expected. And even if it's a third term for Mr. Modi, it would be the second time. Mr. Nehru has already 3 terms. But for this third term of Mr. Modi, some message sent by the voters has to be heard, and some lesson has to be learned from this election. I would maybe begin on the internal stage. Well, it's a third term which is beginning. The 2 previous one, I would say, view from Europe, from France, from my situation. I've been living in India during the second term. They had, how to say that, maybe some different DNA. The first term of Mr. Modi, I was there at this moment, between 2014 and 2019. It has a big, how to say, ambitious reforms, economic reforms. It was the time during which GST was launched, this big tax reform, which was expected since decades, actually, and which led to finally a single market in India, which didn't exist before. Also, all the digital India, many reforms, Make in India, a lot of things have been launched on the economic and modernizing the economy, fighting just a bit more red tape with fast track for investors and so forth and so on. The second term, it was a difficult term, as of course Arpita said at the very beginning, because it was also the time of COVID. It was a very troubled time for many governments in the world. But seen from outside, this second term has been just a bit more probably dominated by topics like religion, Hindutva, communities, and maybe it's unfair to when you live in India to consider things like that, but seen from abroad, this second term has been seen as maybe less modernizing and more disputing on controversial than the first one. And probably if you want to listen the message sent by the voters, I would say that probably you have to get back to the DNA of the first term. That means to go back to a modernization of the economy and reforms. Everybody knows here that President Clinton advisor is supposed to have said someday about the result of the election. What is important, he said, it's the economy, stupid. A very famous quote. And as Ranveer said, the big losses, unexpected losses of BJP in Uttar Pradesh, for instance, or Rajasthan, strongholds of the Hindu belt of the north for BJP. It was also the message sent by voters, and probably young voters. It was, we want jobs, 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 and to fight against inflation. And it's, probably the health, the growth, the jobs, capacity, availability, the fight against inflation are considered as more important than other topics, which are more controversial, like, Hindutva, something like that. And just to quote the fact that even in UP, the BJP lost the seat in Ayodhya, which is a place exactly in Uttar Pradesh when the famous Ram Mandir was built, which is, of course, something which has been considered as a very important, significant signal. So I would say that the lesson to be learned from maybe internally for that will be probably on different topics. I would say, I don't know if this government during the next budget, as Arpita said, this budget will be presented in a few weeks now, actually. I don't know if it will lead this direction or not, but it could be interesting to listen to the message sent by the voters. And that means first, probably to keep modernizing and reforming the economy, and probably to address different issues. It would be too long here to describe them in detail. We can come back on that with question, of course. There's a big issue on agriculture, as has been said. Agriculture in India is very important. It's more than 40% of the labor force, for maybe something like 15% of GDP, with tiny parcels and, a lot of things. Modi government has tried to introduce some reforms some years ago, or some weeks ago, 2 or 3 years ago. It was very, very problematic, and the government was obliged to withdraw its reform. I don't know if it will be very keen to put them forward again, but it's something which is very important, of course, because it's a big reservoir of manpower, but to modernize the agriculture would mean also that other sectors like industries or services are able to receive the manpower which will be freed or liberated or expelled from agriculture, which is at this moment not exactly the case. And as far as industry is concerned, probably also there will be some reform to introduce, probably to take benefit more than today of this big issue around the world among big companies about this policy of China plus one. You know, China has become a country where it has become less safe, less reliable than it was before, and even if the companies don't want to withdraw or to reduce investment, they are more reluctant to add some more investment, and they would be keen to choose other countries in the region to invest as a surplus, which would have been put in China some years ago. And there are many competitors in the region, and India is one of them, of course. And India already received a lot of FDI, of investment from Foxconn, from Apple, from Stellantis, from France, from Samsung, which is something which is very interesting. And for that, to attract this FDI and to develop a real secondary sector, industrial sector, not only through a few families, it's important also to keep modernizing and reducing red tape and reducing issues which are problematic for foreign investment, as land availability, for instance, or even the labor laws Hapita mentioned at the beginning, which was also is a question which has been stalled for this last year. The second, just to be quick, probably there is also an issue about education. Just to mention it, actually, because in India, I've seen that personally. There is very, very good institution like Institute of Technology, Institute of Management, IT, IIM, but it's not enough. And the gap in education level, and especially in the northern part of the country, between India and other countries, especially in Southeast Asia, countries like Vietnam, for instance, in something which is important. This gap is very, very important. It's something which has to be filled by effort, by probably more budget than it is now. It's a few points of GDP dedicated to this education, which is probably not enough. And it's something which could also facilitate the mobility of the manpower and the workforce in India, because as you said, Philippe, at the beginning, the workforce is mainly in the north, the wealth in the south, and mobility is just difficult because there are some language barrier, but also a problem of skills, and something which could be addressed through education. Just a last point about the method. Nobody has address this issue, but just a bit. Because of its absolute majority, BJP didn't get the use of negotiating with opposition, with the states. India is a federal state, a nation, as you know, and there's many states. Many of them, especially in the south, are led by other parties than BJP. For instance, Congress for Kolkata, or regional parties for the rest of the south. But it's very important to come back and to get to negotiate and to enter in a deep discussion with these states, between the center and the states. You know, even the leader of the RSS, Mr. Bhagwan, gives advice maybe to be more to be less brutal, I would say, with different states, and to be more to facilitate this dialogue. I think it would be interesting, and a good example to follow for that was the negotiation led some years ago to introduce the GST. The predecessor of Mrs. Sitaraman, Arun Jaitley, the former finance minister, managed to negotiate during a long period with the states, and especially the southern states, because these states, led by opposition, had a lot to lose with this reform of the GST, because it was a fiscal revenue important for them. And it took many months, even years, but at the end of the day, this reform was launched. And maybe just to put forward this kind of reform, it's also a matter of method between the center and the state. Well, when I say that, okay, just to be quick, I would like to address the second issue, which is what will be happening on the external stage. That means India in the world. I think we have to give credit to the Modi's government, to the previous Modi's government, for the new place of India on the world stage, actually, because really, especially during the last year, India has been on the front page of the world for many events. It has led the G20 last year in Delhi. India has sent a dynamic image around the world and has launched some new policies like, you know, the famous multi-alignment of the foreign minister, Mr. Jaishankar. India is member of the Quad, but also with Western countries, but also of the BRICS and with Shanghai Organization. Even Mr. Modi was not present in Astana last week, but it's also something which is important, but he's in Moscow today. So he tries to India tries to be non-aligned and friend at the same time with everybody around the world, which is reinforced probably the image and the place of India through the world, and probably has play a role in the image of Mr. Modi, even also internally. But if India wants to continue on this route, I think there is probably some direction and some direction to take, and probably, maybe, I don't know, the government 3.0 will follow this route. The first point maybe could be stop neglecting the neighborhood of India, but I think it has already happened. Some years ago, you know, India was neglecting, it was maybe a too hard word, but was not attentive enough with I would say countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, and at the end of the day, and mainly since the new government in Maldives, which is completely now has turned towards China, India has considered that its place also as a regional power is also to have very good and close relationship with the neighborhood. And I see as a very good sign the fact that this neighbor country were invited, and only them, to the oath ceremony of the new government Modi last month. And it was a signal and a sign sent to this neighborhood, I think, which is also very important. The second point would be maybe to forge new alliance and to open new routes for trade, but not only for trade. And Philippe quoted at the beginning the IMEC, the Inter-Middle East Corridor, which is at this moment just a sentence, of course, but it was just launched a few months ago during the G20 in Delhi. But it's very something which is interesting, because it's could be someday beginning of a alternative to Belt and Road Chinese initiative, or something which also forged new alliance with other countries important for India, like the Gulf countries, Emirates, for instance, Israel, of course, and till Europe, which is something which is new and which is also opening new routes, not only with the BRICS, not only with the US, Australia, Japan, and so on, and something which could also have some economic consequences and good issues like that. It's important also, Arpita quoted that at the beginning, for India to be maybe less reluctant with a free trade agreement that is usually his, actually. You know, I was in India when the EU-India free trade agreement project was completely stalled and has been sleeping for 13 years. I understand that just before the election is resuming its awakening, and we'll see. As she said, maybe we'll have soon an agreement with UK. Probably it will be just a bit more difficult with EU, not only because of India also, but also because of EU, because now the population inside Europe has just a bit more reluctant with free trade agreement. We see what happened with the Mercosur agreement and so on. So probably it will be more difficult to sell to populations this kind of thing. But well, anyway, it's something which is interesting because India was known so far to be very reluctant with that. And just to recall, refused to join the LPSC, which is the most important free trade zone in Asia now, 30% of the population, 30% of the GDP, because of the place of China, which could be unstable, of course. And I just would like to end this external panorama with, of course, something which is outside economy, but not only, important also for France, which is the reinforcing and modernizing of defense capacity of India, of course, because what India is facing in the coming years will be a growing rivalry with China, of course. And of course, at this moment, because of the disproportion of force, India is buying time. Actually, try to win time and to reinforce its capacity, of course. But it's something which is important to face the future for that, and that's a very big issue for a new Modi government. Once again, I don't know if its direction will be taken by the new government, but probably seen from abroad, it's something which could be important. Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. And indeed, we have quite a few interesting questions, including one from Mathieu about Mr. Modi's visit to Moscow. And we know that the vast majority of defense procurement in India come from Russia. And this is something, of course, that Europeans or Western countries may not always understand, but this is obviously, we all know that the defense industries are very long-term, and that you know, you do not switch allegiance or rather suppliers. It's not, allegiance is not the right word. In overnight, you do have to take time, and in fact, I think that's what the defense relationship between India and France has been about, but it's still relatively small compared to what the Indian military has been acquiring from Russia, and there are other players as well. We have a lot of questions. Let's start perhaps, let's go back to Arpita and see if she has some comments on the questions on the domestic situation, particularly the one from Zishan Mohammad, who is talking about cricket, but I would not expect less, and the T20 victory. But congratulations indeed. What is the bipartisan NDA Congress approach towards CBDC? That's the retail. I think you alluded to this. And how will it be implemented in the next parliament? And also, there's a question about Pakistan and India. You may want to comment on this. And indeed, we can go through all the panelists, but we don't want to go too long, and we have a lot of questions. So let's deal with that one first, if you don't mind. You're muted.
See, basically, when it comes to reforms, I have seen, and you may have also noticed, that the position of both the sides are not very different. There are certain sensitive sectors, and they tend to struggle to open the sectors which are mostly in the jurisdiction of the state government. So what you need is actually not only the majority at the center, majority at the state, whether there is a state election or not. All these factors determine the second generation reforms, whether you are talking about retail or you are talking about labor market reform. So it's in a quasi-federal setup, this is likely to go into an issue, but still gradual liberalizations are going to happen. Now, the problem is that, see, basically the India-Pakistan relationship has been a little geopolitical. And in a geopolitical relationship with terrorism and everything on the cards, this the approach of the, see, the problems have been there, but approach of this government is a very no tolerance towards terrorism kind of an approach. And India, and there, I don't think there will be an overnight change in the position towards Pakistan. That's my psychological, that's my understanding of this government policies over the last few years. They would not, if it is a more friendly neighborhood, probably over time it will take them time to build that confidence into having, you know, all the South Asian countries together, because the India-Pakistan divide is not a new thing. It has been over a long period of time. I do see one question that is mostly targeted towards me, which is FDI. FDI in manufacturing. See, in the manufacturing sector, there are no major restrictions on FDI. Today, the Indian restrictions on FDI are largely in the services. Although we don't get the FDI in manufacturing, and we get the majority of the FDI in services. So the India's FDI policies and restrictions and the sectors that get FDI is a bit of a dilemma, because India gets FDI in a few sectors, like technology. So what the expectation and what the government has already said it wants to do is to diversify the FDI, you know, into a wide range of sector, target more green technologies and you know, technologies and green sources. And of course, manufacturing from his first term has been a priority of PM Modi. So that is one thing. I don't think they are going to change on the prioritization of manufacturing, because Mr. Modi personally is very, you know, he understands that if you have to move the workers from, if you want to move the people from the agriculture to services, so much service sector can take in. Therefore, there is a need for manufacturing also to develop, to balance out between the three sectors. At the moment, unlike Vietnam and others, India doesn't have that balance. Now, the bigger issue that a coalition government has, and is probably this government is going to face, is actually having a balanced regional growth, which we had discussed earlier also, and also balancing out the interest of the partners. Because if you have a partner from Telangana, naturally you will have to give some amount of priority to that state, and Telangana is also doing well. So these are so therefore there will be coalition partners would like to have certain investments within their states. India has tried to work on the ease of doing business and reduce the logistic cost. Many of the internal studies done by research think tank shows that the logistic cost has declined. Ease of doing business can improve further. And there is already a focus of the government on increasing the ease of doing business. Probably there are certain other areas that the government will look into. For example, one of the areas is, why are we not getting enough R&D and technology? How can there be more investment in R&D and technology, including maybe say we opened up defense and all of that, but real R&D patenting is not happening in India if you compare the patent filing of, say, a country like China vis-a-vis India. So that is where I think there will be a lot of focus. Focus will definitely be on quality, because even Modi 2.0, there were a lot of initiatives that were taken to look at quality, how to help MSMEs to upgrade quality. Because one thing this government has understood, that if we do not deliver as per the quality, there is a high likelihood of products getting rejected by any markets, even the European Union. So they when you're trying to compete with China on a supply chain, only there are two ways you can compete. One is that you improve your logistics and other facilities to make your products competitive. Other is also on a quality, and India is trying to develop resilient supply chain. So as you move towards quality, the government is also thinking about sustainability, because if you can build a sustainable and good quality supply chain, the companies would automatically come into the market. But if you are not able to offer a competitive, good quality supply chain, companies will not come. The other thing that is very clear in Indian context now, and many other developing countries have realized, that with fourth IR technology and automation, just having a low cost labor is not going to give you global business. You will have to have a skilled workforce which is able to run an automated machines. Now this is something that one has to think through. There has to be product traceabilities. You will have to monitor your supply chain partners, because your supply chain partners have to meet their environmental, social, good governance goals, because otherwise it will be very difficult to cater to the global market. I think these will be the focus areas for the government.
Thank you very much, Arpita. Very comprehensive. Let me turn to Ranveer. Do you have anything to add on the Indian supply chain, and perhaps there's one thing coming to my mind listening to Arpita, was the talents. I mean, many Indian engineers and economists and financial people studying abroad in the UK, in the US, in France, increasingly. Why are they not coming back and reinvesting? What about FDI, And this is something that I've been wondering, and also on the supply chain, which is a slightly different issue.
Well, I guess the main problem in the whole supply chain, and in fact manufacturing industry, is, I would say, near total absence of properly skilled manforce. This has been one of the biggest gaps that you can see in India, and it has been there for the last 20-30 years, ever since the economic reforms began. Unfortunately, our, as one of the panelists, and I think you also referred to, the poor investment in education. This means that there's a total mismatch between what students are learning in their colleges or schools and what the industry needs. There have been some instances of, bridging that gap, but it's really too little to count. It's less than a drop in the ocean. So what actually happens today, that even an IT company, I mean, we are an IT powerhouse in the world, but even an IT company like TCS or Infosys, when they hire someone from, who's properly trained in IT engineering, in computer software or whatever, they still have to spend at least 6 months training that person to make that person job ready. So this gap, if you can find in IT, you can imagine how much the gap remains in terms of manufacturing. So we have been, as a journalist, I've been traveling around and meeting with institutions, and we find that everywhere there's this big complaint about manpower not being there. And unfortunately, that's a challenge for India, and of course for the government also, because we are the largest country in the world. We have the youngest population in the world, 35, below 35 years, that means 65%. That's more than 1 billion people. More than 1 billion people are looking for jobs, and they are not ready for jobs. So if this gap is not addressed, we'll not have demographic dividend. We'll have a demographic disaster at our hands. So this is an urgent issue which needs coordination between, it's not just the government's job, but also the industry needs to invest. Unfortunately, each industry, each company is investing only as per their needs. The European model, where the industry association gets together and they take, I can cite the example of France, and also to a certain extent Germany, where the industry association gets together, and together they decide, okay, we need to have, let's say, 100,000 car making engineers. So this is the curriculum that they follow. and they tie up with institutes to have that, practical training for the students while they're in school. So when the students graduate, they are ready to work in any factory because they've seen what the inside of a factory looks like. That gap is there in India, and we need to address that. So the government needs to mandate, they can easily do that, the industry to play a much more proactive role in this, and not just shy away and leave it for the government. Okay, you guys train and give us the people that we need. Industry has to pay some money. It has to be involved. It has to devote its own, managers to this job to bridge that gap. Else, we are going to be looking at the same situation that, yeah, India could have been a success, but it's not there yet.
But the other aspect I was trying to allude to was the fact, in the 1990s or in the 2000s, the Silicon Valley in the US was fed by US trained Chinese engineers, and increasingly these Chinese engineers have been replaced by Indians over the past decade. But some of these engineers or PhD graduates went back to China and helped some of the special economic zones or indeed some of the technology powerhouses to be started. I'm just wondering why, with so many brilliant Indian engineers or MBA graduates, they are not feeding the Indian economic engine. I don't know if anyone has some comments on this.
I think, I'll take it up very briefly first. I think there is a bit of trickle happening, very little. It's really a small trickle of people coming back to India and investing in India, and maybe, bringing up certain scholarships or helping students get there. And of course, creating companies in India. But it's it's again a job. What we see on the other hand is that the outflow of talented Indians continues. The smartest brains continue to go outside India, for the higher studies, and more than 99% do not come back to India. So even the students who go to France to study, most of them would not want to come back to India. And last year, just to give you an example, which may not be directly related, India had the highest number of people, the rich people, who quit India, gave up Indian passport to take out another country's passport. This also indicates, somehow there's a challenge about the long-term prospects of India, that if the richest Indians who make their money in India, if they are giving up the Indian citizenship to take up some other country, it means they can see certain kind of bubble, some kind of challenge for them and for their families. And the same is true of Indian students. Most Indian students you talk to, you say you want to come back to India, not unless if they don't get a job. If they get a job, any kind of job in France, in Canada, in US, they will stay on. They will not come back to India.
It's quite paradoxical, isn't it? Arpita, what do you think?
See, there are a couple of things you have to understand here. To get an admission into a premium university of India is much difficult than to go abroad and study. Indians are very focused on, higher degrees of education. So parents would like to, you have easy access to loans, etc. You can go abroad, you can, take a loan and study in the US or Europe, and that improves your, but the same study, if you go for a private education in India, is not cheap, but it is not very easy to get a seat in premium educational institute. So that's one thing, is that somewhere you are sometimes you go abroad because that may be an easier option to get into a good educational institute. Second problem that was highlighted is that India has the largest number of startups in the world. It is the third largest startups in the world. Now, and you also see startups becoming unicorn. But as you see their growth, there have been many instances of collapse also. If you look at the edutech startups, you in the newspaper, you will see a lot of, the high growth startups, and then there is a sudden crash in their, growth process. Of course, startups, it's a business where some people will grow and some people will crash at some point in time. But there are certain other countries which make things happen, especially because we are talking about Europe and we are talking about France. Here, over the last 10 years, Europe and other countries have, other parts of the world, even like Japan, have started up with a concept where they are trying to attract highly networked individuals individuals with brains and startup with various policies like startup visa. India is one of the proponent of visas in the world, but we do not have a startup visa. The funding that is given to attract startups, we are giving PLI to attract large scale firms into India, but we do not have a similar funding to attract MSMEs to come to India and or a startup to come to India, because the incentive for startups are only for Indian startups. So one of the studies that we did a couple of years ago for Invest India and also for the European Commission, the results, when we talked to companies, the results were absolutely simple. They said that there is no incentive or policies that help us MSMEs and the mid-sized firms to collaborate with each other. And these are the firms that are globally needing support to expand beyond their market, or they need support in their growth path. So in Modi 2.01, in 3.0, one of the core things that needs to be looked into is about scaling these firms and helping them to enter into international partnership through, say, like startup visas or SEZ. SEZ was, what was SEZ? SEZ was a zone created in a Chinese concept when rest of the economy was closed. In India, we did not give such non-fiscal incentive as was given by rest of the world to the SEZs. Our incentive were mostly tax rebates. So the moment the tax rebate got withdrew because of the WTO case against us, which India lost, the SEZ lost its shine. So what is needed is to think innovatively about a special zone where certain non-fiscal handholding can be done for firms to grow bigger and help startups to become unicorn. I think that is where, if we do that, we can build many more large firms. And some of the stories that you get in US, or if you look at Singapore, is that they have allowed those innovations and inventions to have a very free play. And collaborations are also allowed in a very free environment. Some areas where we need to really think through about our growth models and export models, and one of the areas which I strongly think through is probably how should we really talk about sharing of data with a trust. Some of the policies where startups have been really worried about investing in India is how will the Indian data regime or the national security regime evolve? Will it go the China way, or will it go the European way of consumer protection? Because definitely it's not the US way of the companies first. So those are the kind of policy, as the policy unfolds, I think businesses will be more happy to look at long-term investments in technology.
I'd love to hear Jean-Marc's comments, because you were in the chair at the French embassy in Delhi when, I'm sure there were lots of, Indian students wanting to go to France, and I'm sure you're well aware of this incentives and all of this. So I'd love to hear your reaction to what Arpita just said.
Oh, frankly speaking, I completely agree with what Arpita said, actually, because I saw that. And Ranvi has said also just before that we have a very good level of very high specialized schools, and I've seen that if you want to enter the IT of Bangalore, is something which is, my God, you cannot imagine the queue just to enter that. But at the end of the day, what is also very needed now in India is vocational schooling system, as Ranveer said, and to put a bit more money actually on education at the global level, and not only at for the highest stage of the population. As far as students are concerned, I was not in charge of that personally, but we saw a large number of Indian students choosing studying abroad. They chose mostly English-speaking countries, actually, but they chose also, for instance, for many of them, Germany. And frankly speaking, they are more than welcome to come studying in France, and why not at ESSEC school, for instance, business
Exactly.
school.
And by the way,
By the way,
no, I mean, the second contingent of
Yeah.
foreign students at ESSEC, that's also because we're an international school and we teach in English, is the Indian contingent.
But you know, at this moment, we have less than 10,000 of Indian students studying in France, which is much less than in Germany, for France. And you know, when President Macron went to India at the end of January for Republic Day, he put a target of 30,000, which is very ambitious. But at the end of the day, the main issue, as you said, is to make sure that these students take benefit of the education abroad, but can come back to India and help develop the countries. And of course, that's very important. That's why I focused on the topic of education as something which is very important for the coming years, actually, because even without comparing with China, but if you compare with Vietnam, for instance, the level of money, of pressure, of investments they've put on education and secondary education, not only at the level of IT or of IM, is something which is very important. And as I said, it's something which is a hurdle just now for the mobility of the workforce inside India. Actually, there is a lack of jobs in the north. There is a lot of things to do in the south. It's not only a matter of skill, of course. It's also a matter of, well, languages, culture. There is a big divide between north and south. But if you want to fill this gap, actually, it goes through the mobility of the workforce, and something which is hindered just now by the lack of education. So important matters, actually, education. And I've not the figure in the head, but I remember that the budget in terms of point of percentage of GDP dedicated to education in general in India is much lower than it should be, and lower than it is in other Asian countries, and especially in Southeast Asian countries. Something probably which should be a priority for the coming years, and especially if India wants to be what it wants to be by 2047.
I'd like everyone to give perhaps a word of conclusion and perhaps to tell us how they think. Ravir is saying he wants to answer the last question. So please go ahead, Ravi. The last question is, what are the opportunities and challenges that Indian professionals, students might face in the French job market? So please go ahead, of course.
Yeah, I think, opportunities, of course, are there, but the challenges are perhaps much more. One has seen over the last 15, 20 years that the Indian students who do come to France to study, and it's not a lot, it's, as you said, only about 10,000. They face a big challenge in first getting internships, and secondly, to actually get jobs in the French market. And this stems not from the lack of capacity or from the lack of desire, of the school or the business, but largely from the language barrier. So my advice to the Indian students studying in France, and also the professionals, that pick up at least some basics of French at the earliest. That will open the doors for you. Currently, we are a media company. we get internship requests from all kinds of people, from IT, from from BTech students, but not, I mean, not from not only from media or marketing people. So if you do not pick up French, then you will always have this hurdle of finding the opportunity, because the number of companies that will employ unilingual or just Anglophone students is much lesser than the company that will take anybody who's bilingual, at least to a certain extent. Nobody wants you to write a thesis in French, but at least communicate with your customers, with your in-house team in basic French. Broken French, good. I mean, French with errors, good, but some French would be needed. So if you do that, then I guess the market will definitely be there for you.
In other words, if you want to take a training at ESSEC to go back to India or to go and live somewhere else, that's fine. You can follow the international track. If you want to stay in France, then you may need to invest in the language, because it's not enough to be a great engineer or a great financial person. Let's just finish very quickly. Maybe Arpita, you would like to give us a word of conclusion on how you see the Indian economy in the next 5 years. And I mean, India has already overtaken China demographically, but of course that apparently doesn't mean so far that the Indian economy will overtake the Chinese economy. We're far from that, but how do you see if these policies continue, and if FDI, foreign direct investment, keep coming, and apparently they've been slow at coming? Do you see perhaps not a Modi 4 government, but at least do you see a continuation of this coalition or this alliance, and do you see Indian economy making more progress?
See, India, I do think that if India continues to do the right reforms, it can continue to have a high growth rate, because India is benefiting from certain, anti-China sentiments, but only anti-China sentiments is not going to benefit India unless we really have the reforms, put in place the ease of doing business, and continue to provide for the world that we are a fairly open economy where you can invest and you can grow. And I think India there is a lot of opportunities for investment in India. There is a lot, the market is still very unsaturated. There are a lot of growth opportunities, but there are many areas which will require very targeted reform. One of the, for example, GST has been a path breaking initiative, but as of now the GSTs are not linked to the UN SDGs. And when I was looking at only the food and the GST, I would suggest that we now need something which is called a nutrition linked tax. So you can use your taxes and subsidies to actually guide your industry to do the right kind of investment, and emphasize on quality, emphasize on research, emphasize on skilling. And if you do that, I think we can continue to have double the world growth rate as we are having at present.
Great, thank you. Jean-Marc, you have a final word?
Oh, well, very quickly, actually, I'm very confident in India's future, because it's a very vibrant, dynamic, young and joyful and colorful country. So actually, I'm very confident of that. Well, I think the tighter result of the election, tighter than expected, it's not a bad thing, actually, because it probably makes the center more humble, forced to negotiate, to discuss with the state, with the opposition, as I said, and it leads to more check and balance, which is a very important part in a democracy. So, by the end of the day, to be the coalition government, I don't know if I speak of India or for my own country just now, actually, but finally, frankly speaking, it's not falsely a bad thing, because at the end of the day, it's also the basis of a democracy. And I think the big strength of India is it is that it is the largest democracy of the world. Yeah.
Indeed. And Ravir, you have the last word.
Okay. Well, of course, I'm very positive and very optimistic about India's future, but more because of our domestic capacities, domestic market, and domestic strengths, rather than so much, our international trade. Our trade is still a small component of our total GDP. And my own fear is that with the US, with Europe, and with other countries turning more inward, whatever we may talk about FTAs and all that, it will mean that India's options for export-led growth are much, much lesser than what China had, or what even Vietnam and Bangladesh had. So we have to grow. We need to grow, and we need to grow at 10% or 12% per year. 8% is not enough, but we need to grow at 10 to 12%. And for that, we can grow easily, very easily, if we just focus on our domestic market and do it properly. Some exports, some trade is good, but if we put all our eggs in foreign baskets, I do not know whether we can get there where we have to. So let's get our act together. The market is here. The world is coming to this market. Why should we not look at this market?
Absolutely. Domestic consumption is the key, but it's also a key in China, and that's not happening. So they are now struggling as well. Well, thank you very much, Ranveer, Arpita, Jean-Marc. It's been very enlightening, very rich conversation. I'm very pleased. I hope the audience was as well. We had great questions, so it's been extremely productive. And thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we'll see you in a few months for an update, and we can continue the conversation over coffee or tea or cha, and certainly we hope more Indian students come to France, and that the exchanges continue. Thanks very much, and have a great evening, all of you.